Hi everybody, I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is author, director, and producer Geena Rocero. Geena, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
You wear many hats. You are also a tireless advocate for trans rights. And right now, trans rights in America are at a turning point here.
Yeah.
They are under assault politically. In 2023 alone, over 80 anti-trans bills have reportedly been passed. When you hear that number, what's your response?
Let me just say first that I was born and raised in the Philippines. I've had this long journey of a life where trans people in the Philippines barely have any rights at all, right? So I want to take that into consideration in my perspective, especially with what's happening right now. There's a couple of things. One is it's horrible what they're trying to do. A group of people that's supposed to protect all citizens are specifically demonizing what's already the most vulnerable in our community, right? So that's one answer to that. The second part is, I know my community as a trans people, particularly trans youth, we know our truth. We've known it since the very beginning, so there's nothing wrong with us. It's them to be completely spiritually honest. I think it's them so afraid to look within themselves, the truth that we speak about, right? Here we are in a world that doesn't want us to exist, in a world that doesn't create a space for us. We still choose to live our life fully because that's what we're about. And then the other side of that, it's like now more than ever, trans people, the people who are saying that they're allies, we need accomplices right now. We really need more than the lip service, because it's really what's happening on the ground. I'm friends with a lot of people that are working on the ground. It's really dire. And I think, mutual aid support system would help, but more so, we need to hear more as a trans community what's being done in support of us.
Let's talk about those accomplices. How should people join this conversation? People that might not have a platform, people that aren't political leaders. How does just a person who wants to be an ally, wants to be an accomplice join? And where do you see the difference between being an accomplice and being an ally?
I mean, it's also when people ask me the definition of an ally. I mean, purely for me, the ally is it's a verb, not a noun. It's what you do, and really deeply, if we want to look deeply into that, it's really about. It's the marginalized community gets to say that one is an ally, right? Not one gets to automatically define that ally, but what does it really mean, right? And then it should be a constant dynamic conversation about what needs to be done, right? So that's that's first. And the second thing is we know that policies could only go so far. As I mentioned earlier, I'm from the community of the Philippines where it's all about the community. I exist not as an individual in the Philippines. I exist because I'm a reflection of community. I think now more than ever, we really need to really deep within what this community really means. Community where we truly care for one another, where we do mutual aid support, where someone is going through mental health issues. We need to be there for them. Besides just this overarching political policies that we need to obviously advocate for, right? The other, big next step thing is really vote. What's coming up, it's been, I'm not exaggerating here, it's really so much on the line here, not just for trans folks, but anybody that for so long in this country that's been considered as the other. It's true what they say, when they come for me, when they come for us, they come for you. And we see that now more than ever happening more and more.
You said you're from the Philippines, and there aren't as many rights for trans people there. What in America do you think is missing from this conversation, especially at a national level?
I think, just to pinpoint what I'm in the Philippines, I was from the culture of trans beauty pageants in the Philippines, where we've always been part of mainstream society in the Philippines. It's complicated because I always say that trans people in the Philippines are culturally visible, right? We're part of mainstream, but we're not politically recognized. But for my personal journey of moving to America, I experienced the other way around. There was a degree of political recognition at the time, but there was no cultural visibility the way that we're having now. I think nationally, I think it should be both, right? That kind of, political recognition where we have the most basic rights that we're asking for. I mean, it's the basic rights to exist, to identify as we are, to create a safe space. These are basic things, right? But also the way trans people and gender non-conforming people are portrayed in media, we're the first ones to get demonized, right? I think that kind of dynamic conversation always has to happen. And because I'm in the media, I do work in front of the media. As a society, as a culture, we're obsessed with this thing called visibility. And we now know, since when I did my TED Talk in 2014, where it's all about be visible, be out, we now know that could only go so far. I think those things that I'm saying about the dynamic conversation about basic rights, mutual aids, access to the most basic things about mental health care and how we treat each other in the community every day is some of the things that are most important.
You've been at the forefront of this conversation at least since 2014 when you did that really empowering, powerful TED Talk. And we're at the Power Women's Summit now. And one of the major themes of today is lifting the women who are coming behind us up on our shoulders.
Yeah.
How are you doing that? And what's your one piece of advice that you wish you received maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago?
As a writer, producer, director now, I remember after that TED Talk this viral TED Talk that I did in 2014, and the next thing I knew, I was speaking at United Nations, White House, all the places, right? And yes, in the moment, it was really important for me, the only one. I would find myself to be the only trans person, to be the only woman in the room, to be the only person of color in the room, right? And in some instance at the beginning, I felt like, oh yeah, you're trailblazing here. But it came to a point where I realized I wanted to question the system that allowed me to be who I am. And once I started doing that maybe some people would think that I've opened doors, I began to think that how do I keep that door open and how do I bring people with me? And as a storyteller, as a writer, I had a production company or be given a platform and the biggest, media companies to produce docuseries, stories about what it means to be trans and gender non-conforming and really share the vast experiences of lived reality of trans people, not just, from my perspective, but perspective of so many people.
You said in this conversation, so much is on the line. As we said at the top, over 80 anti-trans bills were passed just this year alone. We're not even through 2023 yet. But are you seeing any glimmers of hope anywhere?
I'd say this: when I have so many conversations with trans youth, I'm friends with so many people that are on the ground. When people ask me, what do I say to young trans folks that's maybe feeling obviously the dire reality that they're seeing, especially what's happening in the media, I tell them, you've been part of a long history of trans and gender non-conforming people since the very beginning of time, since pre-colonial times. We've existed, we've survived, we're still here. You're part of this long journey of resilience, beauty, and power. Remember that. Because it might seem very dire right now, try to remember that you've been part of this long journey. And we will get through this by being with each other as a community. So that's what I tell them. It may not create that instant gratification of I don't want to offer fake solutions that it will get better right away. But certainly the bigger picture is that this has been a long journey and we're still here.
And we're still on this journey. You don't want to offer fake solutions, but what do you see maybe as the solution 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road? What does that really look like?
I'd say this from my perspective as an artist. I love creating art where I get to create worlds that are maybe not expected of me. And even as a Filipina, that's not my first trajectory to pursue a career in art. So I tell them in as much as we're being vilified in the media right now, keep living your truth. Keep living unapologetically as you are. because the best advocacy that one could do for themselves is to fully live as they are, despite what the world is telling them to act, to be a certain way. So
I do want to talk about your upcoming projects really quickly. You just released a memoir called Horse Barbie back in May.
Yes.
And first tell us about the memoir, but also what's next for Geena?
well, I'm still on a book tour, so I know I'm going in book tours in universities now. So that's a very particular special thing for me to go and visit college universities, because my mom is a teacher. And for me, it's simple why I love going to universities, because I wish when I was in school there was someone like me who's so proud and unapologetic about living their truth. I could just imagine what it would have done for me, at the time in my life. So I think about that, what it could do to a young gender nonconforming, or just any young college student that wants to see a different perspective in the world, and maybe it could open up a new perspective for them. So I enjoy doing that. And as I mentioned, I'm directing, I'm producing. That's the extent that I could share. So I want to direct more, so that's and write more, and yeah.
Well, we will look out for upcoming projects. Geena, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.